Hello, I'm Joanna Cloy. I'm a Senior Project Manager at Fidra. Today, I'm going to talk about how we can achieve cleaner bioresources, learning from recent environmental and policy research in the UK. I'll highlight noteworthy research that shows the impacts of contaminants in wastewater and bioresources. The problem is well known. We are doing unacceptable harm to soils and the wider environment from contaminated wastewater and biosolids, or bioresources, as they are sometimes referred to. That's because these resources are contaminated with the forever chemicals, PFAS, microplastics, pharmaceuticals, bisphenols, flame retardants. There's also contaminants such as the nanoparticles, there's pathogens, there's metals, only a small number of which are regulated in biosolids. And the threat of antimicrobial resistance is a major threat to human health in particular. There's been ongoing delays. We've been expecting policy improvements to wastewater and sewage sludge management for a long time. We've also seen a lack of enforcement of simple measures such as the fitting of microfiber filters on washing machines as a way to prevent that microplastic entering wastewater in the first place. And some recent research suggested that the land is actually more at risk from synthetic microfiber pollution compared to water. And that's because when they factor in the contaminants in landfill sites, it combined with the contaminants going to soils and terrestrial environments overtakes the contaminants that have been estimated in water bodies. And landfill leachate is a contaminated stream that's mixed with the domestic wastewater streams that are treated at wastewater treatment plants. We know that there's impacts on the environment and human health. Agricultural ecosystem services could be impacted, such as food production itself, and contaminants hinder the circularity of nutrients and water, and the complexity of contaminants is something that really needs to be taken into consideration. We can't just overlook the contaminants, even if they're present at very low levels. We've got intentionally added contaminants added to products. There's also unintentionally produced contaminants, for example, PFAS that might get released into the atmosphere during the incineration or pyrolysis of contaminated sewage sludge. There's also the poorly designed chemicals that are new emerging industrial chemicals we don't even know about. Perhaps they've replaced the poorly designed chemicals that were banned. Substances are often present as complex mixtures as well, and we need to understand the risks associated with those mixtures better. Chemical properties will determine the impacts. For example, the persistence, like the forever chemicals that are very hard to break down in the environment. There's a bioaccumulation where contaminants will be taken up by organisms and concentrate in the fatty tissues and perhaps even biomagnify up food chains. Mobile chemicals also need to be considered because these chemicals are capable of reaching watercourses more quickly. This figure shows how evidence relating to the environmental risks associated with sewage sludge contaminants has grown exponentially since the mid-2000s. So this was a quick search on the PubMed research paper database. And on the left-hand side, there's a table going from 2015 to October 2025, showing the number of papers published. And of course, this is just one publication database to give an idea of this growing research. And it's worth pointing out that there's the perception that there's an asymmetric evaluation of research by environmental regulators. For example, papers that show limited impacts or no evidence of harm from the application of biosolids to land will be readily accepted, whereas research that indicates that there's hazards or risks associated with the use of contaminated biosolids on the environment will be held under far more scrutiny and will be more readily disregarded. So depending on conclusions of papers, there's this idea that there's an imbalanced approach by environmental regulators when reviewing the research evidence. In 2024, Fidra commissioned the James Hutton Institute to use new contaminant information, such as PNEC values, to reassess sewage sludge contaminants and their impacts on the soil environment in particular, the soil organisms. And the contaminants listed here were investigated. A classical fugacity modelling approach was used, where the risks could be predicted. And this figure shows a summary of findings. Key findings were that the microplastics built up in soils after as few as 2 applications, providing a source of potentially significant environmental plastic contamination. And almost half of the pharmaceuticals and personal care products tested posed a notable risk to soil health after just a single application. Also with the organic chemical contaminants such as PFAS that were investigated, a number of them showed strong potential to accumulate, so especially the persistent ones, threatening soil health in the long term. Also, the cocktail effect is likely to exacerbate any of these risks from individual chemicals that were assessed, as biota are exposed to a multitude of different chemicals in the soil. Other research carried out by the James Hutton Institute showed that there was a staggering rise in microplastic levels found within soil samples just after 4 years of sewage sludge application. Other recent research from the University of Exeter showed that the current use of microplastic contaminated biosolids failed to protect 95% of soil biota from microplastics. And 39% of species were affected by 100% exposure, so the worst case scenario. Considering a recent lengthy water sector review, the Independent Water Commission Cunliffe report, this report outlined 88 recommendations in total. And in terms of sewage sludge, there were some recommendations that stood out, such as modernising the sewage sludge regulations, which is something that people have been calling for a long time, including the Environment Agency. Other recommendations included a review of the urban wastewater treatment regulations for England and Wales, and also the consideration of an extended producer responsibility scheme. So we are expecting the publication of a formal response or white paper by DEFRA later this year, and we hope that that will lead to the publication of a water reform bill, which will strengthen protections on soil and water and the wider environment from these plastic and chemical contaminants. Other noteworthy research on microplastics includes research published by DEFRA. The consultants FTech were commissioned to investigate the release of microplastics from intentionally added microplastics in products into the environment. And it was found that agricultural soils were the largest source of these microplastics into the environment due to the recycling of contaminated biosolids to land. So some risk management options were given, which included phasing out sewage sludge recycling to land by either 50% by 2030 or by 95% by 2030, as these were seen as cost-effective measures with co-benefits of reducing exposure to other contaminants. Coming back to pharmaceuticals, a recent study or recent studies have documented the impact on soil fungi in particular, and these are vital organisms that underpin soil health. The arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi in particular support soil nutrient uptake, which, if we impact them, will impact productivity and food security. And it was antifungal pharmaceuticals in particular that were found to impact spring onion systems of the phosphorus uptake by these crops due to the negative impacts on these fungal networks. Moving on to the mobile short-chain PFAS, TFA, or trifluoroacetic acid. It's believed that TFA comes from the breakdown of PFAS pesticides, from wastewater treatment plants, and from industrial pollution and emissions use of pharmaceuticals and F-gases. And it's worth noting that it's the wastewater treatment plants that are a source of TFA, not the biosolids application to land. Fidra commissioned the University of York to carry out sampling and testing of TFA in UK rivers. And TFA concentrations were found to be measurable at 31 of the 32 rivers monitored, with average concentrations up to 2 micrograms per litre, which is towards the higher end of global average concentrations in rivers. And this research got a lot of media attention, and it's really highlighted the importance of these small, persistent and mobile PFAS that we can't overlook. So moving on to solutions. The best solution, in Fidra's opinion, is the upstream prevention of chemicals in products. So improve the restriction and the regulation of chemicals used in products through source control. Invest in alternative technologies, the most promising resource recovery routes, advanced thermal conversion. And this will depend on the research that comes from the Chemical Investigations Programme, which are looking closely into the different alternative technologies that might be viable for the UK. We need collaborative innovation, a multi-stakeholder approach. We need to learn from success elsewhere and adopt best practice. For example, from countries such as the Netherlands or Germany, where alternative circular outlets have been adopted to some success. We also need evidence-based decision-making. Policymakers need to use the evidence, such as the Chemical Investigations Programme research, but also the other new emerging evidence that's coming from academics and other researchers. We need to monitor contaminants in bioresources so that we can keep building on that understanding of contamination. Next steps for Fidra include the development of a position on advanced thermal conversion technologies, such as pyrolysis and biochar production. We hope to develop a solutions-focused roadmap or action plan, which will be useful to policymakers. And we hope to do this with consultants, with the primary goal of protecting agricultural soils from biosolids contaminants. Overall, Fidra are keen to talk to all stakeholders around the ongoing challenges associated with contaminated bioresources. We're keen to help co-design solutions. And just to make it clear, we want improved human and environmental health protection measures by ensuring that bioresources that get applied to land are clean and safe and support nutrient circularity and the UK's policy priorities in this area. Thank you for listening.